Third panel of the day is denying adversary freedom of maneuver, land-based contribution to the Joint Force A2AD capability. Wes Rumbaugh, who's the youngest person on the stage now, is a fellow in the Missile Defense Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and he comes very well acclaimed from that team. Wes's work focuses on missile defense, conventional long-range strike and defense budgets and organizations. He's published on the composition of the Missile Defense Agency budget, Homeland Ballistic Missile Defense, new operational concepts for missile defense systems, the role of elevated sensors in missile strike and defense, and trends in hypersonic strike. Wes, the floor is yours. Give them a hard time.
Thank you very much, Les. And thank you very much to everyone from AUSA for sponsoring this Hot Topic series, and especially for inviting me to moderate. My boss, Tom Carrico, is out of town. He's in nicer weather in the Pacific, so he left me behind in the frigid cold of DC to moderate this panel. But I also want to especially thank the event staff and the organizers who do a ton of often unseen work to pull together these sorts of events. I'm really excited about this topic. For a long time, we sort of thought about A2AD as something that adversaries did to us, rather than something that we could do to our adversaries. And so I think it's important and good now to have a conversation about how the U.S. Can deny access and space to maneuver to our adversaries and sort of implement some of those systems and concepts as a means to deny maneuver. And it's a multifaceted problem set and one that I'm excited to explore today with our excellent group of panelists who I'll introduce to you now. First, we have Brigadier General Bill Parker, who's the director of the Air and Missile Defense Cross-Functional Team. Next to him, we have Major General retired John George, who's the Vice President of Army Strategic Account Executive at Leidos. And then we also have Major General retired Robert Bo Dyess, who's a Senior Vice President in Business Development, Munitions and Government at Day and Zimmerman. And so I just want to kind of start off the discussion here, and I'm going to throw this over to each of the panelists, kind of starting at a high level. I want to get our bearing on the topic, and then we can sort of nail down into the nitty-gritty details from there. But starting with you, General Parker, sort of what are the key land-based contributions to Joint Force A2AD capabilities? And what are the most important tasks that land forces can do to deny adversary maneuver? And then also kind of how are those contributions evolving in light of Army modernization priorities?
So, one, thanks AUSA for having us out. You know, this is a topic near and dear to our hearts. Obviously in AFC and at the Fire Center of Excellence. But you know, when we look at being able to impose A2AD upon an adversary, you know, first off, you know, taking up to the 30,000 foot level, you know, the ability to generate forces within a theater. So those sea locks, those airlocks, being able to get the force generation we need to apply maneuver, to apply fires across the breadth of the battle space. So that's at the 30,000 foot level. Now, when we go down to the 10-foot level, you know, we're looking at the tactical level of warfare, where you know, looking at the you know, General Crooks's most awesome slide that he had up there, you know, how do we throw that A2AD bubble, for lack of a better term, up to support you know, maneuvering to fire at the tactical level, whether that be, you know, with a maneuver squad, with a field artillery battery, whatever the case may be. And it's about building capability around those formations, because we know from history and we know from current operations, there is no silver bullet. It doesn't exist. It's a proverbial thing that's just out there. But what we do know is that being able to layer capability at echelon will provide us the ability to try to achieve that A2AD capability in enabling our own scheme of maneuver. And when we look at this particularly from an air and missile defense perspective, we are looking at being able to use data that we are getting from air and missile defense sensors. And getting that data over to our field artillery brethren, because at the end of the day, to quote a dead communist, quantity has a quality all its own. And whatever we can do to reduce threat effector quantity by taking them off the battlefield is what we're going to use that data, hopefully, to be able to push over to them to execute offensive fires on. Well, at that point, I would probably call it defensive fires from their perspective, but that's another conversation. But that would be critical in being able to use that data from not only the aspects of, we all have the data, but the so what from having the data, right? We know that we have a missile launch from X location inbound to one of our particular assets. Now I want the so what to generate on the side of offensive fires in terms of targeting that archer, as Guy Yelverton used the term earlier in the first session, in order to reduce threat arrow inventory and remove them from the battlefield, kind of from the 30,000 foot down to the 10,000 foot level.
Yeah, General George.
Yeah, great. There we go. It's great to see everybody, and really pleased to be on this panel with these fine experts up here. Robert Bo, that's the way I'm going to refer to you now, Robert Bo Dyess. And by the way, I think only General Brown and I got the memo on the dress attire today. We are very matching. I don't know if you all recognize this, but it's called reconnaissance. So I kind of have been checking off things as General Parker was going down his list. They're the simple or the obvious capabilities that the land force provides, from everything from fires to air defense, countering the adversary's air capabilities. There's also EW capabilities that the land component provides, as well as cyber, defensive cyber in particular, because it's not just the air defense capabilities that provides an A2AD capability, but it's the totality of what the Army across many functions can provide. Being in a position of advantage, for example, to be in theater at a location, only the land force can hold the terrain and control populations. And so that's a key contribution that I think only the Army will be able to provide. I go back to Admiral Paparo's description of how an A2AD environment might look in Indo-PACOM, for example, and consider what the Army forces contribute to that. When he says we need to be able to see, blind, see, and kill. The Army can contribute counter C5ISRT capabilities as a component of blinding the adversaries so that they do not see or they're confused by our locations. We also ought to be disrupting their intelligence collection, their ability to communicate effectively across the terrain that they're operating in. And so those are all things through EW, other counter C5ISRT capabilities that are in the works now that I think also improve an A2AD. Hellscape is sort of the way that Paparo and his predecessor described an A2AD environment in Indo-PACOM. I just wanted to provide for a little context. I did a little research here, so forgive me. I'm going to give you just some quick facts here from some research that I did. And this is from an article by Kagan and Kagan that some of you may have read from the Institute of Study of War, when they describe their new term for tactical reconnaissance strike complex that Russia has put in place against Ukraine. And they describe it as the TRSC, that's the acronym for Tactical Reconnaissance Strike Complex, combination of pervasive tactical reconnaissance, primarily by drone-corrected precision artillery fire, precision munitions delivered by fixed and our rotary wing aircraft, drone-launched precision munitions, a large number of first-person view loitering munitions. And they added tactical because it's the combination now of long-range strikes, drones, missiles, long-range rockets with short-range fires, tube artillery, tactical drones, and short-range rockets, generating tactical effects with operational implications. And so the thing that's interesting about this new TRSC capability is it evolves every 2 weeks. It changes, and those that are imposed by those threats have to evolve with it. So that's the kind of threat that we would have to defend and defeat against in against capable adversaries if we were to provide an A2AD environment that we're talking about today. And then, you know, when you consider the scale of what Russia has been able to throw at Ukraine, with tens of thousands of artillery rounds fired, you know, per day sometimes, thousands of missiles, thousands of rockets, you know, they are creating in some respect a hellscape for the Ukrainians, which have prevented the Ukrainians from being able to conduct maneuver warfare against the Russians. So just in terms of context of what we're seeing, and I know that I'm probably getting a little ahead of maybe a future question, but when you consider what A2AD is to do, it's not just to protect our people, our formations, is actually to enable our formations to accomplish future objectives, which means transitioning from the defense to the offense at some point as well. And yeah, so I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks. I was in Ukraine about 7 weeks ago for a week, and I was on a defense panel. And some of the things I said there was that if you had asked me in 2014 that there would be a major land war on the European continent in which artillery would be the king of battle, I would have never gotten anything in the program, the Army program, through OSD. It would have never made it. And you think about, you know, Sean McFarland and others wrote that article about Dead Branch walking about that time because artillery was doing important FOB security and convoy security operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. So the reason that manned air forces are not that prevalent in Ukraine right now is because of the significant air and missile defense that is on the battlefield in both sides. However, that also has caused the proliferation of the drone, both one-way attack and ISR type of drones that are on the battlefield that are connecting to other enablers. They're enabling both sides to kill each other. And so after the Sochi Olympics in 2014, I would have never thought that that would happen on the continent of Europe. Now, as far as the important things that to deny enemy freedom of maneuver, I think it's different. I think we are very comfortable as an Army, and I'm talking about a former Army officer, in thinking about land forces and land battles in the continent of Europe, in which we're talking about integration of fires and integration of air defense with maneuver and fires and long-range strike, et cetera. I think it's slightly different in the Pacific, and we may be able to get into that a little bit later, but I think our cues are going to be tipped from either space or air in the Pacific because of the long-range strike capability. And primarily, if you think about, we're in a competition where we're not in an active warfight, and then we go from, if you're either in offense or defense, we're essentially going to be on defense first, unless we initiate. So we're going to be essentially sitting there, and it's going to be very important to have the tips and cues from both air and space. And finally, you know, I was here for one of those breakfast sessions with Carl Gingrich, the G8, and thinking about how the Army is transitioning their modernization plan, which was the third question that we were asked. I wrote down 18 programs that Carl mentioned specifically. And in April timeframe, you really can't tip your hand on what's in the president's budget beforehand. We all know that, both on the industry side and on the government side. But of 16 of the 18 programs that General Gingrich mentioned, they were all either missile related or counter air related or long range precision strike related. The two that were not particularly in that category was the maneuver support vessel, which would be supporting forces in the Pacific and contested logistics, and software upgrades in general. Those are the two that he mentioned. And you could argue that software upgrades in general also apply to long-range precision fires or missiles, et cetera. So that was the answer to those three questions, Wes.
Yeah, great. And I think that, we teed up sort of the next topic, and especially General George kind of highlighted the adaptability of the threat as something that's being a major driver of kind of how the U.S. has to start thinking about some of these things, and especially, it's maybe sort of a form of potential maneuver on our adversary's part is technologically, in addition to in time and space in the battlefield with that sort of technological development. And so from the industry side, I think the question is sort of, how do you build the flexibility into those systems to be able to respond to that adaptability that the adversary has shown? And then sort of secondarily from the government side, how do you design that requirement in the first instance to keep up with that evolving threat set? And then General Dyess, I think, also addressed sort of maybe the question of across theaters as well, the differences between the European and maybe Pacific theaters. General George, do you want to start with me?
Sure. Robert Bo and I would love to talk about requirements generation, because we both sat in similar, the same seats at different times to do requirements integration and resourcing those requirements in the building, and to some degree reforming how the Army staff did their AROC business. So first, on the requirement side, it's not just the way the requirement document's written. It's the JSITS process. It's the bureaucracy that it takes time to go through the wickets in the building. It's really important that the three legs of the stool, the resources, requirements, and acquisition are tied together at the hip, and that those create an integrated strategy that's achievable, and then has a champion that supports new requirements for capabilities. That's just sort of where I think the foundation of how we advance requirements. How they're written, I think the Army's made some pretty good advances here recently with the chief's memo on the network that essentially describes the characteristics that the Army needs, left it very broad for industry to come back and say how they would solve that problem. I think General Rainey has done a good job as well as accelerating the timeline on requirements documents for the ACDD process, getting them in a very fast pace at making decisions and tying those to prototype delivery, experimentation, and putting them in the hands of formations that are actually deploying to learn about. So that close relationship between those that are delivering the capabilities and those that have the requirements to put them in place, whether it's soldier touch points or it's continuous modernization in a formation is helping to advance our capabilities faster. So I think generally we're doing a better job on requirements description. The last thing I would say is General Rainey, I think, also made the case that as an Army, we do better when we don't specify the capability, but we specify the problem that we're trying to solve and let industry come back. And so that's a good approach that the Army's taken. That's on the requirement side. Let me jump to the industry side real quick. Of course, we want modular. In our design of our capabilities, we want modularity. We want open systems. We want software driven over hardware lock so that we can evolve systems through software refinement. It's a lot easier than bending metal and changing the form of a particular capability, I think. And we need to ensure that as we're developing these capabilities, that they're resilient against EW and cyber from the design. One of the things that I'm very proud of the company that I work for now is the foundation of using digital engineering across all of our designs that gives you the flexibility to redesign, recast how capabilities will look through the design process before you have locked in on a particular form of a capability.
Yeah, so how do you design requirements and capabilities to keep up with evolving threat? So one of those things that are not I think that one of the things we all in this room agree on is that we do not want our servicemen and women to be surprised on a future battlefield, because that means that future servicemen and women are going to be killed on the battlefield. So we do what we can in our own specific areas and jobs in order to keep that from happening. I think back on the non-M side to Eager Light 1998 in Jordan, where brigade combat team staff went over with a mission command training capability to Jordan to train some of the Jordanian brigades that were up on the border with Syria. And we described how we brought together our command and control systems at the brigade level to form the TOC, which would allow us to share information, who else needs to know. And they said, we can't do that. We do not have air superiority here, and we have to have our cells separated physically on the ground so that we are not destroyed by enemy airstrike. And I would argue that we're almost in an area where we have to consider the same thing of not having air superiority, at least initially, and the way that we train our soldiers. And I know that they're taking this on at NTC and other places to train staffs to operate in that way. On the industry side, I would just say magazine depth. When you've got time, you don't have any money. And then when you've got money, you don't have any time. And so you've got to be able to think about what is the magazine depth that you've got. And Wes, your organization, CSIS, I frequently cite this war game that you did back in February of 23, I think it was. But essentially, it's running a scenario in the Pacific Theater in which they ran out of long range, both defensive weapons and offensive weapons, in less than a week. And so how do you, with contested logistics, how do you rapidly reinforce defensive or offensive fires when you've got a lock that's thousands of miles long? So I'll just say that on the industry side, when you put your pedal to the metal, it's not going to happen right away. We were asked to accelerate munitions for artillery, and it takes about 18 months because you've got supply chain and you've got workforce and you've got second shift and third shift and the training of them. So on the industry side, it is not as simple as like, hey, we're going to give you money. It's arsenal democracy. It's a World War II model. It's not like that anymore because of the Last Supper that Bill Perry had back in 1990 that said, industry, you'll either merge or die. And so that's why we've got 5 to 6 big primes now, and you've got a supply chain that's very efficient, but not effective.
So, gentlemen, I'm just going to give you both a big amen on that one. And sir, I think you hit the nail on the head with respect to, looking at it just from a requirements perspective in terms of, telling what the problem is you are trying to solve, as opposed to, a specification on an interceptor or a launcher or wherever the case may be. That was a great analogy with respect to the characterization of need that was done on Next Gen C2 in terms of allowing industry to be innovative in the approaches they come back with, that can help us achieve the level of lethality that we need to on the battlefield, and looking at it in terms of a magazine depth issue at a cost that we can afford to produce to that level. Because at the end of the day, and sir, you remember from time in the Pacific, that quantity is a quality all its own is absolutely imperative, because Rory Crooks, Shane Upton, and I over in Contest Logistics have had a lot of conversations when we look at a scenario like that, and we are looking at a potential fight in the Pacific. That is a tyranny of distance issue, to make sure that not only do we have the inventory where it needs to be coming from, but how to get that inventory then forward into the fight through multiple island chains. And that is a significant problem set in and of itself. And some potential ways that we can do that in helping reduce cost, so that we can increase those stockpiles that we have available, to defeat the numbers that we would have to defeat. Even with the inclusion of offensive fires, is not insignificant. So,
Can I add one other thing? This gets a little bit more specific on the air defense component of the question about, how does, in terms of requirements, how do we at industry deliver adaptable systems? For air defense, I think we have to consider the risk of, and this is where I'm looking for a little either confirmation or strong resistance. I think we have to consider the risk and the just the risk of library-based threat analysis in our systems based on the evolution of how quickly the threat changes. And so there are ways that you can identify threats and identify friendlies that takes some of that library system out of the equation. And then whether it's internal to Army, it's TRAC, CAA, or whoever's got the analytical capability, or partnering with industry that has, I'd say also some very strong analytic capabilities and modeling and simulation, run these threat systems and scenarios thousands of times, in terms of machine learning, to get to a place where you've got a pretty solid solution waiting for different environments that you might have to operate in. But there should be a partnership between us and, the Army and industry, whether it's partnering, like I said, with TRAC to do that analytics, or on the industry side. And I generally think we're very transparent in our communications. We've done really well, especially with the cross-functional teams and industry, to talk challenges and requirements. But sort of the next level, I think, is that partnership in analytics.
yes, sir, I absolutely agree with that. When we are looking at, obviously it's the speed of relevancy, in terms of, library-based systems are what they are. They're going to go from the last known point, but the ability to have that machine learning aspect in order to get to the issue of speed across the battlefield is critical, especially with the speed at which the technology and the threat is evolving. And that absolutely has to be baked right into what the requirement is and what we're asking the industry to do.
Great. So another topic that was sort of very prominent on the last panel was talking about survivability as a driver of requirements, and the need to, suppression of A2AD systems has been a key part of the U.S. way of war for a long time. It's something that adversaries are also copying in addition to our technology. And as lethality options have proliferated, the need to sort of avoid that. How does that change the mobility requirements, not only for offensive systems, but also defensive systems themselves that are targets there? And then what are the biggest challenges for some of the legacy systems? We're not going to divest immediately from all of the legacy systems. What are the biggest challenges to making them suitable to that modern, more lethal battlefield?
Yeah, I think if looking at the observations, coming out of the fight in Ukraine, honestly, on both sides, if the targeting cycle looks like this: I emit, I get detected, I am engaged, and I die. And that can happen in relatively very short order. So the ability to have mobile systems that can move, that can displace in relatively a short time increases their survivability aspects. And you know, when we talk requirements, you know, that's obviously a piece that we've been focused on because traditionally, you know, Patriot has not exactly been an extremely maneuverable platform. And as a matter of fact, it's not. It is mobile, but the ability to move to an alternate location and reestablish your defense from there is going to be critical within the next fight, or you're going to end up in that targeting cycle of I admit, I don't move, I get detected, I get fired upon, and I die. So that is, you know, that's got to be a key aspect as we look at moving forward, as well as, you know, when I move further down into the tactical fight, you know, the ability to shoot on the move, because it's not just about having that, you know, and again, I'm not a big fan of the term bubble, but I'm going to use it anyway. Bubble in support of the maneuver force, right? As we are maneuvering to fire, as well as we're consolidating gains. So we have to be able to have that effect of enabling that commander scheme maneuver during the entirety of the operation if we're going to maintain our own A2AD capability.
I just think about action, reaction, counteraction, sort of the IED thing. We are able to block the radio controlled initiators. Then they went to command wire, and then we were looking for change detection, and then they went to underground point detonating, pressure detonating things. And the cycle of UAS change in Ukraine's about every 6 weeks, and so it's the ability for us to identify what either our action or reaction is going to be and the counteraction to that, and to do it quickly, because our system is not really based on quick changes. We do probably as fast as we were able to do it was in doing that counter ID work, which took a while, and then as soon as we had something fielded, the enemy changed the method in which they employed it and would continue. And I would argue that any adversary is going to be a thinking adversary because they're trying to utilize their advantages, and they're trying to take advantage of our some gap that we have on the future battlefield, or the battlefield in Ukraine. Electronic warfare is very present, and I think that the discussion about having very high end things that are that can be jammed is important to figure out different ways to defeat that, and perhaps even conventional rounds are coming back. But it came back to what General Formica was talking about sending those conventional rounds to the as close as you can precise location about where your target is going to be. So the ability to utilize drones or manned aircraft or space to be able to find out where those target locations are, and then to send that there with a very trained force is going to be important as we go forward. And the other thing is that in Ukraine, everything on the battlefield is seen in the different domains. They can be seen visually, they can be seen in electromagnetic spectrum, they can be seen infrared. So it's just something that we have to consider when we go into a large scale combat operation, that we're going to be fighting an enemy with capabilities similar to our own.
Yeah, and I think that tees up, you know, we have a discussion of air and missile defense. It would be impossible to have that without a discussion of the counter UAS threat. And we had some of the discussion about sort of needing to distribute counter UAS to larger sections of the force rather than just dedicated air defenders. That comes with some challenges in terms of how do we proliferate those capabilities across the forces, and sort of what are the important considerations for things like rules of engagement, airspace management, joint fires coordination, to make sure that we're denying our adversary maneuver rather than denying our own maneuver forces or denying our own forces. And I think that that's especially going to be important with things like directed energy and electronic warfare as well. So maybe General Parker, if you want to start there, and then General George.
Yeah, so one of my goals is to make combined arms for air defense cool again. Look, 14 series soldiers, we can't be everywhere all at once. We're not exceptionally large branch, but we have a large requirement thrust upon us based on the needs of the combatant commands and the needs of the commander, and we get that. But going back to NTC rotations in the late 90s, early 2000s, combined arms for air defense had an effect on the battlefield. And that's one of the things that we're looking at from an Army Futures Command perspective is formation-based layered protection. And this is an aspect of that with respect to counter UAS EW. There's a whole slew of others. But specifically within the counter UAS space, we are looking at soldier unit common equipment sets that we can give down to maneuver formations, at echelon from the squad all the way up to division. That includes, the counter UAS batteries that we're currently issuing, began fielding to our divisions, but at a greater scope and scale in terms of getting that down to lowest echelon, and that could include anywhere from passive detection capabilities, EW defeat capabilities, kinetic defeat capabilities. There's a lot of good systems that we see out there that industry has been working on that we're very interested that we see in filling that space. Down at the lower tactical levels that allows that formation then to save its own life. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. Because if we can increase their survivability, we can continue to deliver effects on the battlefield and support that commander scheme maneuver. Now, we also know, right, that 14 series soldiers are trained to execute this. And that's where we're looking to potentially have a culture shift here as we talk across the rest of the .mil-PF in terms of, now airspace control measures, understanding of execution of it matters. Because while I can say, yeah, I have no problem destroying that UAS that's up in the air right now, because I don't know if it's friend, foe, unknown, wherever the case may be. But if I'm that company commander who's relying on that particular UAS as my eyes and ears, then that is a significant emotional event to me. And being able to operate that within those airspace control measures, having a clear understanding of what they are, and even the ability, looking forward in the future, we have size, weight, power issues, when we're talking modes and codes and UASs and IFF, but a way to be able to get data from those particular UASs and be able to use that data to identify is this a friend? Because at the end of the day, that's really what I care about. So, some thoughts on that as we move forward in terms of also using, and Colonel Yelverton talked about it earlier, decision aids with respect to AI and ML and how we can develop those in terms of understanding the data that's coming in, because look, this is going to be a very congested, contested space that we're going to be operating in, but understanding the data that's coming in and being able to provide recommendation to the operators on not only what to engage it with, but whether to engage it or not. And when we're talking about, that congested and contested space, that's going to be extremely important because speed will matter. And what everything we can do in order to relieve the cognitive burden on the operator is going to be extremely important, especially since they could be an 11 Bravo, a 13 Bravo, a 19 Delta, whatever the case may be, who aren't necessarily have gone through the air defense schoolhouse in order to have the fundamental skills that we are used to our air defenders having within that particular fight. So I've spoken a lot. I'm sure I'll turn it over to you.
No, you checked off a few things on my list here. You know, I do think practically there should be some consideration for system on a chip technologies that, you know, holy cow, you get a teddy bear now that listens to you and talks to you, right? So these systems on a chips are small, can be ubiquitous, relatively low price if you wanted to put them on friendly systems in order to better track and not shoot down our own capabilities. That's just one idea. The other is, you know, decision aids. I've seen, I mean, I'm sure a lot of our industry partners have AI/ML enabled decision aids. We've been working on one in particular for the Air Force that came out of DARPA. And it's able to control air-to-air combat in this hellscape environment with a pretty high level of precision, real-time dynamic retasking of aircraft. The same can be applied to counter UAS capabilities for a formation on the move capability with the right decision aids, having the man or the woman on the loop to agree that the decision is the right decision to push the button on. The latest demonstration I saw of this capability was just a week ago, and we called it Ender's demonstration. If you've seen Ender's Game, you'll know, you know, I should ask for people to raise their hands because it'll identify culturally who's, you know, age-wise and stuff. But at any rate, so we did this demo, and it was a single operator pushing a button that ran the execution of an unmanned system swarm. Because of safety limitations, there were 8 real flying UAS and 100 that were simulated that a single person controlled, and it made real-time decisions to optimize the fleet's accomplishment of the mission. Right, so there are those sorts of decision aids that are very applicable to counter UAS IMD as well. Just a couple ideas.
There's never going to be enough air defense to go around everywhere. And so Corps division commanders will be putting them on their high value assets to protect the SPODs or to protect the ammunition or protect the fuel that's flowing down to the edge. And I would just say that maybe not a new launcher, but a something that goes as a munition into a current capability, something that goes into a 203 40 millimeter perhaps, or something that goes into a 50 cal, or something goes into a 30 millimeter cannon would be very helpful when you're a maneuver company commander, battery troop commander down there at the edge of battle, which you might be just outside one of those bubbles. That's one thing. I'm a big student of history on deconfliction. Rick Atkinson wrote the trilogy on World War II. The number 2 book was Day of Battle, in which the invasion of Sicily with parachute drop, the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment took significant casualties, hundreds of them, as they flew over the Navy's invasion force, getting ready to drop onto Sicily. Would that ever happen today? Damn right, it could happen today, because there's drones that are flying out there right now with those different capabilities, both friendly, enemy, and coalition, and the high school guy that's flying some drone out there. And so which one is which, and which capability are you going to shoot down, that was enabling maneuver for friendly force or keeping a enemy force from calling fires on you. So it's just and the finally on just advanced aircraft, having worked at Northrop Grumman, I saw, you know, we made the fuselage and data links for the F-35. We made the B-2, we made the B-21. but there's advanced aircraft that are out there, and we've got forces that are able to shoot down aircraft that are in airspace, and that's why there's no aircraft flying into Kyiv right now, because things are on automatic. And they have to clear their own airspace if they fly military aircraft around in the Kyiv area. So there's a couple of aspects of deconfliction that we would think would never happen again, but it's something that we ought to be training on and teaching and educating in our schoolhouses. And this airspace management is manned aircraft, helicopter evacuation, drones out there flying around, and indirect fire. It's a big problem to me, just standing on the sidelines and looking at this. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that we can all conclude that it's going to be very, very crowded in the airspace management sort of situation. So we've got a couple of questions that have been flowing in from the audience. I'm going to kind of try to group them together. General Parker, your expertise has been requested in a couple of areas, and to sort of highlight the area of layered defense, people have asked for program updates on three things: the Stinger follow-on, demand signal for cruise missile defense, and then joint target custody for long-range effectors with range beyond their organic sensors, and how the Army is approaching that.
Okay, so first off, the next generation of Stingers. So that capability, and I'm this is really in the PO missiles and space lane, but let me just say there are currently industry members who are competing for that capability, and we have they're still in the development phase of it right now, and we do have testing lined up in the future. Don't quote me on the dates on that, but yes, absolutely very interested in that capability, in being able to improve on the capability that Stinger provides today. The next question was, Wes, help me, was
demand signal for cruise missile defense.
Oh yeah, cruise missile defense. Obviously, when we look at the operations in Ukraine, and we look at the potential of what the PRC can bring to bear, cruise missile defense capability is one of the joint priorities for the Joint Force. It's something that we'd rather not have to patriot our way out of. So that is why the integrated protection capability we are looking at right now, integrated fire protection capability, with going after the cruise missile defense gap first, before looking at any other residual capability, because at the end of the day, I'd much rather expend a $400,000 interceptor on a cruise missile as opposed to a $4 million Patriot interceptor. So that is, going back to the cost curve, and where we can help out on that is something that would be critical. Now, with respect to the last question, being able to use sensor data, because traditionally we have been stovepiped. Right. If I want to fire a Patriot missile, I have to have a Patriot radar from that battery, illuminating the target, getting that data back, and then flying a missile out from that data. What the integrated battle command system does for us, it allows us to break that stovepipe, in terms of now I can, looking at where we are at today with any sensor best shooter, I can potentially leverage that radar data inherent from either the current Patriot radar or the LTAMS radar, which will be the Patriot replacement radar, use that data and conduct an IFPC engagement of that, in a cruise missile defense capability. We are also looking at capabilities that exist out right now that's in development, and we've actually experimented with out at the last capstone, Project Convergence Capstone 4, in terms of a capability where we can leverage joint AMD sensors, be able to use their data and fire Army effectors off of that data. So that's really getting us toward the ability to move toward any sensor-based shooter using the IBCS fire control capability that we will have with that, along with that joint developed software that would enable across the joint force. I think I came close to that one.
Yeah. So another question that we got was one that everyone kind of touched on at various points, was the relationship between defense and the adversary mass that they can generate, and the need to try to get on a better side of the cost exchange ratio, trying to drive down the cost of interceptors in relation to the things that they're intercepting. Sort of how do you think about that problem? Is there some expectation setting that we need to do in terms of our ability to get entirely on the opposite side of the cost curve? And are there any priority threat sets that you would think of as being top priority to try to resolve those cost relationships first on?
I'll try to take a stab at that one. I think in what's been happening, if you look at what's been happening in the Middle East, and you look at, specifically what's been happening in the Red Sea, I think the Navy has learned a valuable lesson in expending, their SM-3s, SM-6s against some of the Iranian proxy drones that are out there, because the cost curve on that intercept is pretty steep and significant. So, where we're looking at, in terms of electronic warfare, in terms of directed energy, being able to associate those and help us bring down the cost curve in using those capabilities. Not only that, but also low cost effectors in being able to get after that as well, because at the end of the day, that can really propel you down a bad slope with respect to not only your own missile inventory, but your ability to produce that at scale.
Yeah, I went and so in the early bird every day there's a one section that says all attacks by the Houthis in the Red Sea area that we know of so far. And so it started in October of 23. I went through and counted from October 23 until mid-July 24. I counted 554 different types of attacks, which included drones and anti-ship ballistic missiles. And it doesn't really go through the expenditure of Navy assets. It does when they're attacking one of our vessels, but they've attacked merchant ships and sunk a couple and killed several people. Fortunately, so far, none of the U.S. naval personnel have been killed. But if you think about Tower 22, we've been attacked on the ground for a couple of years, and finally they snuck one in on us on Tower 22. I expect to see something like that in the Red Sea area as well. But the expenditure, this gets back to the magazine depth things that we were talking about and the cost curve. Navy has flown aircraft and shot down some of those drones as well as a different way to get after that.
Now just go back to getting left to boom, right? Shooting the archer. I think any formation adversary that's able to penetrate our defenses has to be punished decisively. I mean, and so instead of relying on our aircraft to shoot down every incoming UAS, getting left to that and changing the calculus in our adversary's minds really significant. If you think back to the IDF using a trophy on their Merkava and tanks, so it's a vehicle protection system. When a inbound munition comes in, it's able to shoot that down. But it also identifies the point of origin of the shooter. And when they started implementing that and using it in combat, it changed the dynamic on the battlefield where the shooters stopped shooting. They did because they were getting zapped every time, you pop up with an RPG or something. And so the same, use that as an analogy here for how do you change the cost curve? It's changing the calculus on the use of the adversary's use of the threat systems against us. And then just one other caveat, we talked about EW, even cyber effects, directed energy lasers, microwave, where you would assume that you can bring down the cost over time of using systems like those. I remember General Rainey talked about it. I don't know if it's Capstone 4, but there was a exercise where they turned on an EW jamming capability and to get after some of the threats, and it just shut everything down. And it was the whole, so this idea of training with our systems is really important to learn the right tactics, the right TTPs for implementation. And that's in itself a way of, I think, reducing the costs.
Hey, thanks, sir. You just told on us.
All right. We had another question from the audience that I think follows on nicely to that, to General Dyess, sort of regarding the manufacturing supply chain of munitions. In particular, can you expand on the comment, effective supply chain or efficient supply chain, but not effective? What are the efficiencies and why is it not effective, and what is needed to make it effective?
I think COVID might have been at least a canary in the coal mine where we had identified across the Defense Department supply chains about where these small mom and pop shops are that were developing a widget, let's say a cable, for example, that are utilized in space and utilized in air, utilized in ground systems. That with one person out of the loop and shut down, or 14 employees with COVID, shut down supply chains that were that showed off in production of capabilities. I think industry, at least from my perspective, if they had things that were on the shelf during that time, they utilized, and it wasn't 2020 that was the issue. It was 2021 and 22, because now that they had pulled things off inventory and put them in, and then backfilling those in order to keep the production capability. So with mergers and acquisitions and the allocation of some things to supply chain, which is outsourced out through the United States and other places, you have an efficient supply chain, but not an effective one. If you want to say, put the pedal to the metal and give me more like ASAP, it doesn't happen. It's going to take time to develop the supply chain with more capacity, because that means more shifts and more raw materials that are coming in. So that's the difference between being very efficient and having things that are on the shelf that are produced so that you can expand and surge your capability very quickly.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be an area of concern across not just the AMD space, but in the munitions space, but across the defense industry as well. So I think that we're about a minute away from our time. So I think that it's a good stopping point to wrap up. I think that we've had a great conversation about sort of a lot of different topics, a lot of different areas in which the Army is investing in its A2AD, some challenges that it has to overcome, and then some of the possible solutions. So I'd like to thank all my panelists again for their remarks and for their expertise, and thank AUSA again for hosting the event. And I'll turn it back over to you, Les.
Thanks. Let's give our panel another round of applause.